So Matt Rhule has been at Nebraska for 3 years now. This is his third season. Rhule has a career record with the Huskers of 12-13. He's being paid almost $10 million a year. Nebraska's blue blood status is being questioned and has been questioned by many people because of their losing ways. And last year they finally broke through, went 7-6, 3-6 in the Big Ten. They finished 12th. And they beat Boston College in the Pinstripe Bowl. They almost choked that one away, just like how they almost choked several other games away during the season. But they also had several close losses. It was a very Nebraska season, except they broke the curse and finally went bowling. The question that everyone has now is, Matt Rhule typically has breakthroughs in year 3. Look at his stops at Temple, where he went from 6-6 to 10-4, or Baylor went from 7-6 to 11-3. What will that look like at Nebraska, where you're in the Big Ten? It's different from the American. It's different from the Big 12, but also, to be fair, the Big 12 was different from the American, and the same thing was replicated. What's going on? I mean, what's this year going to provide for Cornhusker fans, number one? What's this year going to provide for Nebraska long-term that the fans can't necessarily see? Think about if Nebraska goes 10-2, or dare I say it, they go 11-1 like Baylor did in 2019, the fans will be elated, but I think there would be benefits from that the fans wouldn't even immediately recognize. There'd be a huge recruiting boost. Nebraska would be talked about outside of their own state at a national level for the first time since it was clear that Scott Frost was on the hot seat, and in a more positive way for the first time probably since the Bo Pelini era, over a decade ago now. So I think that there's a lot at stake in 2025 for Nebraska. That doesn't mean I think Rhule is on the hot seat if they don't win 8 or 9 games this year. This doesn't mean that there isn't any patience, that there's definitely a lot of pressure on Matt Rhule, because I don't think that's the case with either. I think there's competitive pressure on Matt Rhule. I don't think there's job security pressure. And I also believe that with Nebraska, I think they still know that they're building up. I think the portal class that Nebraska brought in, which was top 15, included 4-star offensive linemen in the portal rankings and grades like Elijah Pritchett and Rocco Spindler. I think that along with getting players like Williams Nwari, Nyziah Hunter, Dane Key, among others, shows that Nebraska wants to win now. Matt Rhule wants to win now. But some of these are long-term investments. Some of these are compensating for, I think, recruits that may not have panned out or are not progressing in the way that Rhule wants them to progress. Maybe they're too slow in terms of progression, or they just don't have the potential. You know, even the best staffs in America misevaluate recruits. I mean, think of Tyreek Johnson going to Ohio State. I think 5-star out of high school, didn't even play in the NFL, for example. That's no disrespect to him, by the way. It's just an example, misevaluation. Think of Joe Milton for Michigan, and then kind of for Tennessee again, where he, I think, disappointed when the light shined the brightest on him. And there are plenty of other examples too. I think like Adrian Martinez. I don't think he was necessarily a misevaluation, but with the troubles that Frost had internally and externally, he wasn't going to succeed. And he was more so misdeveloped as well. But that's the question here. Is this the team Matt Rhule has been waiting for? So let's do that and talk about it. Whether this Nebraska squad has what it takes, whether outside factors like scheduling, like to a certain degree, I would say recruiting, because there are still many Frost players on this roster, and recruiting and player development, a lot of it is under your control. Not all of it is. You know, Seth McLaughlin last year, I think, was helping someone move when he ruptured his Achilles. That isn't under the staff's control. That's just something terrible that happens. And thankfully, you know, he was able to recover, and I think that he'll at least have, you know, like a decent, respectable NFL career, hopefully one that's better than that. But whether it's the outside factors, whether it's the internal factors, like whether let's say Nebraska as a football program is my physical body. What am I putting into it that's good? Am I putting in the correct recruits, the correct culture? Are my organs functioning? We can use the organs as an analogy for the analysts and for the coordinators, and the heart of the program, the assistants on the field, off the field, is your brain, the thing that runs everything. The CEO is Matt Rhule doing the right things, making the right changes. Is he the right guy? I think that final part of my question won't be answered for a while. I definitely think he is better than Mike Riley. I think he is better than Scott Frost. I think that at this point, with how withered Nebraska has been, that Bo Pelini-like wins would probably secure him a job for life, and then after that, Nebraska might look to level up. Maybe that's improper intuition. But I want to start off reacting to 2024, and also, as you can see on the screen, you have a schedule that you can look at right there. And I think it's a very advantageous schedule. I will also say that clearly Vegas looks at this team as an 8-4, 7-5 team. The win total 7.5. It's juiced to the over per FanDuel with -122 odds. Nebraska's +100 to finish just under that. So you're looking at 8-4. And then 7-5 is the two most likely records, with a schedule that is Week 1, Cincinnati in Arrowhead Stadium, Week 2 versus Akron, and Week 3 versus Houston Christian in Lincoln. Week 4, Big Ten Conference opener against Michigan in Lincoln. Michigan will in all likelihood not have Sharon Moore for that game. Then Nebraska's on a bye in Week 5 before playing Michigan State at home. So the first true road game that Nebraska has is in Week 7 at Maryland, and then they have another road game, so back-to-back road games, which is always tough no matter what conference you play in, unless you're like an uber-talented team. And even then, with the portal, NIL, new roster limits, depth has never been thinner, at least since the college football playoff kicked off in 2014. Minnesota is a road game in Week 8. Week 9, Nebraska returns home to play Northwestern. They also host USC the following week at home. Week 10, Week 11, the Huskers travel to UCLA. They got a bye in Week 12. Week 13, they play at Penn State, which I think is the hardest game on their schedule by a mile. And then Week 14, on a Friday, going to be probably an afternoon game or a night game. Maybe it'll return to being a noon game. Who knows? We got the Heroes game on Friday, November 28th, Week 14 against Iowa. A lot of these teams lose a ton of production. Maryland loses a lot. USC loses a lot. UCLA loses a lot. Minnesota loses more than Nebraska does. Cincinnati, I don't think, is in exactly great shape. Iowa loses more than Nebraska. And then Penn State, Michigan kind of return a similar amount. And there's no Ohio State on the road, and Nebraska almost beat Ohio State last year. And I got to be honest, I think to a certain degree they almost should have. I think that Ohio State's talent and Marcus Satterfield ultimately cost Nebraska what should have been a victory in Columbus. But you live and you learn from your mistakes. Looking at this schedule tells me that Nebraska should definitely go better than 6-6. If Nebraska goes 6-6 again, there are definitely some issues. But I think that even if it's 7-5 or 8-4, I don't think that there can be a ton to complain about in the sense of hot seat. Rhule's not the right guy. It would be another win gained. It'd be linear improvement over 3 years. So you'd have a track record of improvement record-wise year over year over year. And likely power ratings as well, because I don't think this schedule's harder than last year's. It might be a little bit easier, but last year's schedule was not exactly super challenging either. I mean, losses to UCLA at home, Illinois at home, Iowa on the road, USC on the road. You change those and keep the Ohio State and Indiana games, the two best teams they played, as L's. Nebraska goes 10-2. And all of those opponents were beatable, and all those opponents, Nebraska at one point led. And they were dominating Iowa. At one point, they were dominating Illinois. It's just within the margins. If Nebraska gets marginally better, I think that counts for something. Now, that's just the expectations, and I think that is, room for a different video. When you look at this specific team, there are some concerns I have, like the defensive line. Nash Hutmacher is gone. Ty Robinson is gone. Princely Unman-Malin, well, he transferred to Ole Miss, and there were other transfers that left the room. The defensive line in the 3-3-5 defense that Nebraska, well, that's their base defense. They lost their D coordinator. They lost several depth players and several starters. That's a big concern for me, especially when Nebraska's run defense last year was wildly inconsistent. Showed up against Iowa, showed up against Ohio State, didn't do squat versus Indiana, didn't really do squat versus USC either, although USC had an awesome rushing attack last year. Only Penn State's and Iowa's were better in the Big Ten. And they lose all of that experience. And they have a new defensive coordinator in John Butler, who's only been a DC for 1 year in his career. That was at Penn State back in 2013. And they did not have a good defense. That's kind of more of a hidden concern, though, not one that I am very confident is a problem. It's the same thing at defensive back, where I think there are limitations. We've seen that for 2 years in a row, but it's something that might be fixable. So it's a little bit hidden. I'm not confident that it's an issue, but I do think D-line is a huge area of concern, and game management is as well. Rhule has a track record of losing close games. Now, the longer he goes on, the better he gets. And this was especially apparent at Baylor, where, look, in 2019, Baylor finished ranked in the top 15. They were 11-3. Their 2 losses were to Oklahoma, both of them in the regular season. And then, well, they lost to Georgia, who was a pretty good team that year in the Sugar Bowl. Georgia's had a fluke loss to South Carolina at home, and they had to meet up against the juggernaut that was LSU. But look at that team and how many close games that they won. They beat Rice 21-13, Iowa State 23-21, Texas Tech 33-30 in overtime, West Virginia 17-14, TCU 29-23, game of field goals. They lost to Oklahoma, so 5 close wins. Lost to Oklahoma in 2 close games. It's 5-2 in close games that year, and then Georgia beat them by double digits. You look at Temple in 2016. They lost in a close game to Penn State on the road, 34-27. Also to 34-27 loss to Memphis that year. Beat UCF by a point, had another close win. Nope, they were 1-2 in close games that year. Even in his best season with Temple, they had a losing record in close games. And then in 2015 with Temple, another 10-win season, they had close wins over Cincy, UMass, that's 2. They had a close loss to Notre Dame, and a somewhat close loss to Houston and Toledo. Still wasn't. It was a 2-1 overall record in close games, even that season. Competed with good competition. I mean, Rhule's shown that he can get close against big teams and good teams as well. But even in those final years at Baylor, his final year at Baylor, final years at Temple, he did not beat a Power 5, Power 4 ranked opponent. He didn't do it. The schedules were pretty easy in comparison to even this Nebraska schedule. And I think that being in the Big Ten, where you have tougher teams, more physical teams, bigger teams, deeper teams, and your program's been behind the 8 ball for a few years, I think that game management and coaching is more important than even in any of those prior situations. And coaching overall, I think, is something Rhule's great at, but specifically game management, I think that's a big question. I look at the strengths of this team. I think that Dylan Raiola is going to take a step forward. I love the wide receiver room. I think linebacker, with whether it's Vincent Shavers, Javin Wright, Dasan McCullough, Marques Watson-Trent, who I think is going to have a breakout season along with Vincent Shavers, a Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year, Marques Watson-Trent, and also their rising talent and depth because they've recruited well, they've stacked classes. I also quietly think that corner and the interior of the offensive line could be areas of strength for Nebraska. But the concerns that we have seen in 2023 and 2024 can't be avoided. Rhule's original plan has had a lot of changes to it. He's using the portal more than he initially wanted to. A lot of his friends, guys that he liked, that he was close to, that he thought could succeed with Nebraska, are no longer here because they didn't work out. Very similar to some of the Scott Frost guys who came in, and then, Frost had to part ways with Troy Walters after 2 years because it just wasn't working out. I think the difference between Frost and Rhule is that Rhule's a harder worker. Rhule doesn't have off-the-field issues, and I think that Rhule is a more confident guy, a better guy, a wiser guy. But still, there have been issues with the original plan. The good news to 2024 and 2023 is you saw a clear improvement in culture, recruiting, and also the fact that he's adapted his game plan, and I think that his adaptations have had more positives than negatives. Like, losing Tony White and replacing with John Butler, I think, is a definitive downgrade. But I also think that Marques Satterfield going to Dana Holgorsen is an even bigger upgrade than the former coaching change is a downgrade, for example. You look at Nebraska bringing in 37 players. Their average rank per recruit per the composite is nearly like a lower level 4-star, which is pretty good for Nebraska recruiting if you followed it in the 2020s. 12 4-stars, 25 3-stars, a lot of depth pieces, a lot of roster changes, and again, the most likely record here, we're looking at 8-4, 7-5. So is this the team? I think that Dylan Raiola under Dana Holgorsen is going to take steps forward. He had 2,819 passing yards last year, 13 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 129.9 passer rating, took 27 sacks. The pass protection is something that I don't think is a strength or a weakness, but the dirtier secret to Nebraska's offense is the fact that they average 3.8 yards per carry while not even taking 200 sack yards. It's not like they averaged that and had Bryce Young, like you're taking 50 sacks in 2021 because your tackles are that awful. That's not what this was. Nebraska not only struggled in pass blocking, they legitimately could not run. They could not run the football. It was so bad. They had no push ever in the ground game, and half the reason they didn't average probably 3 yards per carry instead of 3.8 is Dante Dowdle's just a tank. So you run him forward, always falls forward an additional yard. You take away that additional yard, you're talking about around 3 or even below 3 yards per carry. Their longest run of the year was 42 from Emmett Johnson, and I am confident that came against an opponent that legitimately didn't matter. It came against UTEP. Came against UTEP, guys. And then his other long run of the year came against Northern Iowa and then Boston College in the bowl game. So, again, Nebraska couldn't run the ball. Their offense was dreadful last year. Their defense was wildly inconsistent, but they were better than they were the prior year. I think my verdict on this question that I came up with, that I wanted to answer with you guys, is it can be, but I'm not confident that it is. I'm somewhere in the middle between I am out on Matt Rhule and I'm all in. If you are all in on Matt Rhule, all in, and there are reasons to be, this team should win 10 or 11 games, or 9. I'm not going to exclude 9 and say that winning 9 would be a disappointment. They should go 9-3, 10-2, 11-1. They have the talent, the recruiting profile. They've upgraded their assistant coaches over the years. I think this is their best assistant staff they have right now. And they have a good strength and conditioning program. And the longer Rhule is here with his culture, especially with the breakthrough year they had last year, I think the more the cloud of losing dissipates. And that's going to help this team play at a higher level. If you are all out on Matt Rhule, though, and there are actually reasons for that as well, this team will probably go 6-6 again, or maybe even regress a little bit because their strength the past few years has been the defense. And this roster, I'm telling you, the offensive roster is much better than this defensive roster. If Holgorsen can't entirely fix the offense and the defense craters, that's a possibility. This team could get worse compared to last year. I don't think it'll get worse, but I'm also telling you, since I'm in the middle, that I am not inclined to think this team will win 11, 10 games. I think that 7, 8, 9 is kind of the range, and I would even include 6 in there. I could see them going 6-6 again. So there's definitely the opportunity. I think that if you are a Nebraska fan, though, you should be happy, or you should be content with 7-5 and happy with 8-4. That's my verdict on this. They absolutely can beat anyone on their schedule except for Penn State on the road. And with how they played Ohio State last year, and with how Rhule has played teams in the past and punched above his team's weight class against the Oklahomas of the world, the Penn States even at Temple, shout out Matt Rhule, Penn State alum, Notre Dame when he played him in 2015, maybe he can win that game. But I'm somewhere in the middle on this ultimately. I think that next year's team is going to be even better than this year's team. I think that if Rhule is at Nebraska for the long haul, they're going to, on an average basis, get better and better and better. Very slowly, but still every year incrementally getting better until they get much closer to their ceiling, because I don't think they're quite there at their ceiling right yet. So ultimately, if you're a Nebraska fan, you should be very optimistic. You should have it with caution because you've been hurt before in the past, but last year you went bowling, you finished with your first winning season since 2016, the recruiting is trending up, the NIL is trending up, the wins, the program, the optimism is trending up. You get a 5-star quarterback in Dylan Raiola, who's viewed as a future first-rounder. You get him in year 2. And when players make their biggest jump is typically from year 1 to year 2. Similar with coaching staffs. And Raiola has a much better offensive coordinator and QB coach than he had last year. So there should be optimism right now in Lincoln, Nebraska. That's for sure. Go Big Red.